Center for the Ethiopian Educational Information and Communication Technology presents Educational Satellite Television Programs.
Hello, teacher. Hello, students. Welcome to today's lesson on the formation of ionic bonding. In our last lesson, we defined chemical bonding as the attractive force that binds atoms together in a molecule or a crystal lattice. We learned that valence electrons are responsible for the formation of chemical bonds. In today's lesson, we will explain the term ion. We will learn about the formation of ions by looking at specific examples, and we will define ionic bonding. We will also describe the formation of an ionic bond, as well as look at some examples. Shall we begin? When atoms either gain or lose electrons, they become ions. An ion is an electrically charged particle. There are two different kinds of ions that exist. Those that are positively charged, which are called cations, and those that are negatively charged, which are called anions. The chemical properties of atoms of metal elements are different than those of atoms of non-metal elements. Metals tend to have 1, 2, or 3 electrons in their outermost shells. They also tend to lose these electrons to become positively charged ions, or cations. If a metal loses an electron, it becomes an ion with a charge of +1. If a metal loses 2 electrons, it becomes an ion with a charge of +2. Non-metals, by contrast, might have 4, 5, 6, or even 7 electrons on their outermost shells. They tend to gain electrons in an effort to reach a stable octet. When they gain electrons, they form negatively charged ions, or anions. If a non-metal gains an electron, it becomes an ion with a charge of -1. While hydrogen is considered a non-metal, it is capable of forming both an anion and a cation. For example, it can form a hydride ion, as in sodium hydride, and it can form a hydrogen ion, as in hydrochloric acid. Students, let us try an activity. Why do metals lose their electrons easily, while nonmetals tend to gain electrons? Write your answers on a piece of paper, and I will see you in a few minutes.
Students, Let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Welcome back, students. I wonder what explanations you came up with. Metals lose their electrons easily because they only have a small amount of them, generally between 1 and 3. These valence electrons are loosely bound to the nucleus and require low ionization energy for their removal from metal atoms. Nonmetals tend to gain electrons. This is because they have more, generally between 4 and 7, and they are trying to become stable octets. This means that they are trying to gain electrons until they have 8 valence electrons, so they can achieve the stability of noble gases. If you answered correctly, well done. Elements within certain groups of the periodic table have certain tendencies. For example, metals in group 1A often lose 1 electron when they combine with other elements. When this happens, they produce cations with a +1 charge. For example, sodium and potassium each lose an electron to form ions with a +1 charge. Group 7A elements often gain an electron and produce an ion with a -1 charge. For example, both chlorine and bromine each accept 1 electron to produce an ion with a -1 charge. Students, look at this table. It shows the position of some other elements on the periodic table based on the ions they normally produce. As you can see, there are a few trends based on groups. Consider the 4 elements that you see here. Determine whether each element gains or loses electrons in chemical bond formation, and write the ions they form. Also, indicate the charges on the ions that are formed. You may begin now.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Hello again, students. I am sure that you had no trouble with this activity. Did you notice that both calcium and barium are group 2A metals? These metals tend to lose 2 electrons when they combine with other elements, forming ions with a +2 charge. Thus, calcium and barium lose 2 electrons and form cations of a +2 charge. Oxygen and sulfur are both group 6A elements, or ore-forming elements. They generally accept 2 electrons to form ions with a -2 charge. Thus, oxygen and sulfur gain 2 electrons and form anions with a -2 charge. Great work, everyone! When cations and anions come close to one another, an electrostatic force of attraction is set up between them. This force of attraction between oppositely charged ions is called an ionic bond or an electrovalent bond. This type of bond is formed when electrons are transferred from the outermost shell of a metal atom to the outermost shell of a non-metal atom. Let us look at an example. A sodium atom only has 1 valence electron. In order for it to gain the electron configuration of the nearest noble gas, which is neon, it must lose its valence electron and form a sodium ion. Chlorine has 7 valence electrons. By gaining 1 more, it can attain the electron configuration of argon and form a chloride ion. In today's lesson, we learned about ions. We learned they are electrically charged particles. Positively charged ions are called cations, and negatively charged ions are called anions. We learned that metals tend to lose electrons to form positive ions, whereas nonmetals tend to gain electrons to form negative ions. We also learned that when cations and anions come close to each other, they form ionic bonds. These are typically formed when electrons are transferred from a metal to a nonmetal. This brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Until next time, thank you, teacher. Thank you, students.